The following program is made possible with support from the Federal Highway Administration, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, and the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission.
It is such an awesome experience to be driving along a back road.
You pass a beautiful farmstead, you see cows grazing in a meadow.
Coming down into a valley where the creek bed comes through from the watershed.
You wind around a stream.
And to come upon this treat,
You begin to get immersed.
it's not just any place anymore.
These old bridges are tunnels to history.
They're part of the landscape. They're historic, but you don't think much about them. They just go by as you drive along.
Pennsylvania, because of its need for bridges, because of its rivers, because of its railroads, its canals, there were very early, fine examples of the earliest covered bridges, the earliest iron truss bridges, some of the earliest steel bridges in the country. I don't think you could find a state in the nation where there are a greater number of bridges of different types than you could find here in Pennsylvania.
And it's the frequency of the occurrence of some of these bridges that gives you an insight into the cultural preferences in an area as well.
A community that people want to live in is a community where people will want to come and visit.
The nice thing about creating places like this and improving the bridge itself is visitors feel like, hey, these people care about this place. I'm going to spend some time here.
Tourism is the second biggest industry in Pennsylvania. When visitors come to our state, they come to see Gettysburg, they come to the Liberty Bell, they come to our other famous historic sites. But on their way there, they cross many of our historic bridges.
It's clear our past is very important to the commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Our historic bridges offer a connection to our past. These structures that transport us across rivers and through time help shape our community's identity. They celebrate our heritage, reveal our culture, and support our thriving tourism industry. But Pennsylvania is very different today than when many of these wonderful historic structures were built. And just like when they were designed and originally erected, today's infrastructure must address the needs of a growing and prosperous state. In an effort to balance our history with safety and progress, PennDOT has developed a roadmap for community involvement as we address the ever-demanding needs of our infrastructure. What follows are the stories of just a few of Pennsylvania's historic bridges, why they matter, how they'll serve us in a new age, and how people like you were involved in their outcomes.
We're in the steel city today. Before it was a steel city, it was an iron city. And people here learn to innovate and build using those materials.
Pittsburgh is the city of bridges. So it has more bridges than anywhere else in the United States. The fact is that you can't tell the story of Pittsburgh without talking about its bridges.
And one of its famous bridges today is the Hot Metal Bridge.
Adaptive reuse typically refers to the process of reusing an old site or building for a purpose other than which it was built or designed. The term can be applied to bridges. While today the Hot Metal Bridge is still used to cross the Monongahela River, its modern use is very different than the intent of its original design.
The Hot Metal Bridge originally carried hot molten metal, hot steel, across the Mon River between two parts of the J&L steel plant.
This bridge played a very important function within the operation of that mill. And what they would do is they would load it into big torpedo-shaped metal cars, which would then be pulled across the river so they could then be worked in the finishing mills on the south side of the river.
Today, the bridge has been adaptively reused as a bicycle pedestrian bridge and an automobile bridge.
We take great pride in our bridges because it's part of our identity. It's as much tied with the identity of Pittsburgh as steelmaking is.
They represent a kind of skill that involves foundryman, casting, working with hot metal.
I think here in Pittsburgh, people do have a sense of their past. It's all around them in the tangible reminders of their past, from the wonderful architecture downtown, the rivers themselves as they converge here at the point in Pittsburgh, and the wonderful bridges that span those rivers. All of those are reminders of the past, those innovators who have gone before.
Here's a wonderful example at Central Penn College of the reuse and rehabilitation of a bowstring bridge.
Adaptive reuse doesn't just mean reusing a bridge where it originally stood. Some bridges get relocated, picked up and moved.
This is Hensey's Bridge on the campus of Central Penn College. It was first put in use in 1869 in Slatington, Pennsylvania. And in 1900, it was moved to Wanamaker, Pennsylvania, and we've been its home here for about 12 years now.
We'll take every reasonable effort to avoid and minimize impacts to the bridge. If it's a historic bridge, we'll try to preserve it in place. And if that's not reasonable, then we'll look to market the bridge through PennDOT's website. When that happens, we'll have a state agency or nonprofit organization or even a private citizen who's willing to relocate the bridge and what is termed as adaptive reuse.
Adaptive reuse in its simplest sense is putting a bridge to another use, something that it wasn't originally intended to do.
When you have the old bridge in place and you can use it again for a different purpose, that's the best of all situations.
Federal Highway and PennDOT will provide a portion of the funds to relocate the bridge, and the bridge will then be used by the community however it's seen fit.
As Hensey's Bridge was put into place, we quickly realized we had something unique. When you think about it, a college experience is a bridging experience. It gets you from where you are on one side of the creek to where you want to be on the other side of the creek.
Hensey's Bridge on the campus of Central Pennsylvania College is a great example of a community preserving their cultural identity by repurposing a piece of history. It connects their past to a vibrant future.
What we would like to do is to encourage people to be aware of the metal truss bridges in their communities, because once they're gone, they will not be rebuilt. And it takes a special effort. The people need to be engaged in their historic resources and their care for them.
They're historic for a reason, so we want to support that, and we want to take every step we can to preserve that.
Oftentimes, a span enters a state of disrepair. Rather than simply replace it, PennDOT uses PA Project Path as one of its primary tools to engage a community, gather input, and consider all of the possible outcomes. PA Project Path is a website that contains all of PennDOT's current projects. By using PA Project Path, Pennsylvania residents can be aware of the bridge projects in their community and offer input for consideration.
The Mortonville Bridge in Chester County is a stone arch bridge built in the early part of the 19th century.
It's all tied together with the very beginnings of our country.
It became the subject of a PennDOT project because it was narrow and in a poor alignment.
As bridges are inventoried and determined to be in disrepair and need of work, they try to bring them all up to modern code.
We look to see the condition of the structure, the type of structure it is, its location, and really the process that we would have to go through in order to do anything significant.
In the case of the Mortonville Bridge, a total redesign and replacement was PennDOT's initial recommendation. Balancing safety against preservation is a difficult challenge for PennDOT.
When these old bridges are lost and replaced with sort of nondescript concrete or steel, that's when they run into community opposition, when the community does not want to lose a historic resource.
Well, these bridges are cultural artifacts, but they're not in a museum. They're not under lock and key, and so they are being used by people leading their 21st century lives.
Once these bridges are gone, they're gone. And, is it really that important for you to get across the bridge maybe 5 seconds faster than you would otherwise.
Again, PennDOT used PA Project Path to capture community input, which fostered solutions.
We heard the criticism, we understood why it was being made, we understood the concerns. And so we did take another look at rehabilitation.
Which is what we want to hear in the preservation world. We want to hear that word rehabilitation rather than replacement.
It is always a compromise to balance the interests of historic preservation. All of these things have to get folded together into one set of plans on every particular site.
It still speaks to the community, and most often these new modern bridges just don't have that character that you get proud of and sort of makes your heart go pity-pat when you go across the bridge.
Sometimes transportation safety and the infrastructure needs of a community cannot be met with rehabilitation. With input from the community, PennDOT can facilitate a context-sensitive design for a new bridge.
The Auction Road Bridge in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania was a rare example of a reinforced concrete through arch.
We don't yet have the fan club that we want for historic bridges, which are beginning to deteriorate after all the years, and sometimes they haven't been maintained as well as they should, and they have more traffic than they had in the days when they were originally built.
As an example, the covered bridges in the county are a popular tourist attraction. And that's because the county covered bridges are original covered bridges. They behave structurally the same way that the original settlers designed them. It's a link to our past, and that's something that's important to people in Lancaster County.
Knowing the popularity of Lancaster County's historic bridges, the project team helped facilitate a design that preserved the original bridge's historic character and original structural design.
Two Engineering in Lancaster came up with a replacement design that mimics the old arch and reminds the community of what it used to look like.
It was important for us to replace it with something that looked similar and behaved structurally similar to the original bridge. We wanted to be able to allow traffic to safely pass across the structure and provide access for the nearby Mannheim Auto Auction. It was also a very unsafe bridge. It had steep approaches leading onto a single-lane bridge, which made it difficult for opposing traffic to see each other as they approached. It did have exposed concrete and steel, which was corroding. It's typical of a lot of bridge work that needs to be done across the state. We had many partners who helped us through this: Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, PennDOT, the county, the local governments. Everybody was a partner in this project, and I think it could be a good example of how we could address the issue of deterioration in bridges across the state.
Context-sensitive design was also at the heart of the design for the new Gay Street Bridge in Phoenixville. With input from the community, PennDOT designed a span that not only celebrated the past, but provided the modern infrastructure necessary for a community to thrive and prosper.
Context-sensitive design is being sensitive to the history of the crossing and the environment in which the bridge lives, which includes community feeling about the bridge and a sense of place.
We are in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, very close to the French Creek, very, very close to where it joins the Schuylkill River. This is the place where a lot of the patterns were formulated in the production of the bridges and rails and other things that the industry needed. It was the core of what had once been over 130 acres of the former Phoenix Iron and then Phoenix Steel Company.
PennDOT engaged the community. They discussed rehabilitation options, they discussed replacement options. Eventually, what they came up with was a replacement bridge. It fit with its setting. It wasn't an off-the-shelf standard bridge. There was an effort to educate the community about the history of the bridge and about the history of the Phoenix Bridge Company that once operated near the bridge.
The Phoenix Iron Company was a pioneer in building and making all of the things that the expansion of the railroads needed. There are Phoenix column bridges across the United States: Oregon, California, Texas, Virginia, of course, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the New England area.
The Gay Street Bridge was originally an iron truss built in the 1880s. It was replaced in the 1920s by a reinforced concrete arch, and in the last few years it was replaced by a steel arch that mimics the old reinforced concrete arch. Many historic bridges are built using materials that aren't used very often today. Embedded within each of these materials is a certain kind of knowledge. It's a kind of knowledge I think anyone who's worked with their hands can recognize. Looking at a very old bridge, you can see that craftsmanship, you can see that workmanship, and the bridge is sort of a time capsule, hearkening back to that knowledge. It's really the only way to get at it, except by working with those materials once again.
Sometimes, an old bridge must be replaced with a modern design.
Old bridges were once new, and when they were new, they were designed to handle a certain amount of traffic. Turnpike in its first year handled about 2 million travelers. Today, it's over 100 million. What was perfectly adequate back then has become inadequate. And so Turnpike engineers do have to look at replacing bridges. They can't simply build on to the existing old ones.
In the case of St. John's Bridge along the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the widening of the road to accommodate the volume of traffic the turnpike sees means the removal of the bridge and the steps that accompany it.
A lot of people have referred to it as a stairway to heaven. And actually we say, no, it's a stairway to St. John the Baptist Church.
The St. John's Church Bridge is an overhead bridge. It's a rigid frame. Unfortunately, they're built of concrete and steel. They're not of a width that we can accommodate our 6-lane typical section with a widened median. And all of that is in conformance with today's highway criteria to make it for a safe highway.
It was built to address community needs to access the church after it was separated from its community by the construction of the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
When the typical turnpike traveler drives by the St. John Church, I'm not sure what he thinks, whether it's an oasis. When somebody gets on the turnpike, the only oasis that they normally are thinking about are the service plazas.
The church has a warm sense about it, a sense of peace. You know, you're in the rat race of the turnpike, and you can just stop and just take a rest.
We're impacting their lives, and we understand that, and we have to be compassionate to their understanding and their way of life. So my engineers, my project managers have been working with the church and the community on replacing the structure, trying to fit it into the community the best we can, so that at the end of the day, the bridge is going to be gone, but we're going to hopefully leave them with something that, albeit not the same thing, but something they'll be proud of when we walk away.
They're putting more lanes on. The speed limit will be increased along here. More property is going to be impacted. So goodbye steps.
When the outcome of the process, including community input, determines an old bridge must be replaced with a modern design, PennDOT understands there can be a tremendous sense of loss to the community.
The Charleroi-Monessen Bridge was a long-span truss bridge over the Mon River between Charleroi and Monessen. The community really took a stand in trying to save this bridge, but in the end it had to be imploded.
The bridge, I feel, has been a vital part of the community, both Charleroi and Monessen, because it ties us both together, especially when the mills were working.
You couldn't walk down the streets, there were so many people there. And with the economy and the close of the steel mills, it's dwindled down to just being a survival community, and the bridge was important to us.
Very often, a community learns that its historic bridge might be replaced when a notice appears in a newspaper, when there's a public meeting called by PennDOT.
So at that point, we just thought they were going to fix it. Well, lo and behold, next thing we know, there's a senator speaking up and saying, oh, this bridge is unsafe, it's terrible, and so forth and so on. It was more like they didn't recognize the history.
A lot of times we get accused of not caring. If we didn't care, well, we wouldn't have made this bridge last for over 105 years in the first place and done everything we could to keep the bridge structurally sound, retrofit it, make sure the traffic can go over it safely.
With the close of the bridge, we were very disappointed that they couldn't exactly reproduce the bridge.
Everything we do as an organization, as PennDOT, it revolves around safety. We had to go into it with the mindset of we're going to replace the bridge, but we're going to preserve as much of the historical significance of this in any way, shape, or form that we can. And we try our best to appreciate all the local concerns, but in the end, we have to make some tough decisions.
When I saw the demolition of the bridge, it was very disturbing, heart-wrenching. It was, everybody was cheering and things of that sort, and they didn't realize what they had done to their own history.
And they're irreplaceable. They won't come back because they are anomalies to what the building standard is for bridges in the United States today.
It's a beautiful responsibility to preserve, and it's a challenge to educate others to understand the level of importance of what we have.
When someone who cares about an historic bridge learns that there's going to be a project involving it, it's important to get involved as early as possible.
Be forceful. We don't mind when people take us to task and hold us accountable because that's the right thing to do. This is their money at work.
People who are interested in their historic bridges and their historic communities should certainly join their county historical society or their community historical society.
Where once there were covered wooden bridges, we now have metal bridges that are still functional and they're still beautiful.
There's sort of a legacy that we can leave.
Our bridges are part of the fabric of our cities. They're part of our history.
Here in Pennsylvania, we understand the past is more than the trailing image in our rearview mirrors. Our historic bridges serve to remind us from where we've come, so that we can use the lessons learned as we drive into the future. Our historic bridges matter. Your input matters. Get involved. Log on to paprojectpath.org to share your views on the historic bridges in your community that are slated for improvement. Together, we can ensure that our historic bridges continue to connect all that was to all that can be.